Britain's railway industry is about to see the biggest change since nationalisation. The changes will affect everyone who works for British Rail. Most of you quite soon, all of you within the next few years. Of course, there's anxiety in the industry about the great changes ahead. Areas of particular concern are employment rights, travel facilities, and especially pensions.
I used to work for a company that was owned by Robert Maxwell, and my pension money was stolen during that scandal, and that's the reason why I'm worried about my present pension fund.
Free travel is important to me. It's okay, it's a perk, it's an extra of the job, but it's a good one.
But most of our staff are worried and they do want to know what's happening.
This video will try to answer some of the main questions that people are asking. Are our pensions safe? What are our rights? What does the future hold? By Easter 1994, Railtrack will have taken control of almost all of Britain's railway infrastructure. The single organisation of British Rail, with its 125,000 employees, has started restructuring. The privatisation process begins in earnest with the separation out of Railtrack. The new organisation, the jobs and the people in those jobs become a totally separate company from BR. At the same time, new train operating units are formed from the old profit centres. They'll be increasingly independent. Over time, they'll become privately owned franchise operations. Those new organisations, the jobs and the people in those jobs will be transferred to franchisees. The freight businesses, the new infrastructure service units, known collectively BRIS, and all BR's other support services will also be preparing to become independent companies. Over the next 2 or 3 years, they'll be offered for sale. The people with their jobs will be transferred to new employers. BR will still be operating train services and still be employing many thousands of people for some years to come. But almost everyone who works for BR now should expect to be working for a new employer before the end of their career. Either Railtrack, a passenger franchise company, or a business that has been sold. Ever since the Maxwell saga, the security of pension schemes has come in for a lot of attention. Uncertainties over BR pensions generated such political heat that in May last year, Transport Secretary John McGregor was saying,
I gave a pledge at the outset, which I repeated in this House on more than one occasion, I think, that British Rail's pension funds would not be used for any other purpose than paying pensions.
A new joint industry pension scheme is now to be set up for the railway industry by autumn 1994. Everybody within the BR pension scheme will be transferred to this new joint industry scheme, the JIS.
We've taken 4 principal steps to safeguard BR pensions and pensioners. First, we are independent trustees of the employer. 6 trustees are appointed by the trade unions and 6 are appointed by BR. Second, post-Maxwell, we took independent legal advice to make sure that the pension rules represented the best practice that we could achieve. Third, we tackled vigorously the proposals that government put forward in the White Paper and secured some very important changes. For instance, insisted on the establishment of a joint industry scheme. That wasn't in government mind initially. And finally, there never was any intention and there has been no transfer of assets from the scheme to government.
The JIS will have central trustees to oversee the scheme and central investment and administration teams. Your pension will be in one of the sections of the joint industry scheme, depending on who your employer is in the new railway. But what about existing BR pensioners and deferred pensioners? Well, they'll be transferred to another section, a closed fund that is guaranteed by government. The existing BR scheme is one of the best in Britain.
One important point to remember, of course, is that the scheme will still be administered by the same people once it's a joint industry scheme as manage it at the moment. So all the fruits of good investment that have brought valuation increases in the past, at least the same people looking after your scheme in the future.
The Railways Act 1993 gives you two principal pension safeguards. As long as you're in continuous employment, and as long as your employer remains in the railway industry, you have the right to remain in the JIS, and you can insist that you do so. Secondly, even if your new employer leaves the railway industry, as long as you remain in continuous employment, you will have a legal right to a pension no less favourable. In other words, pension arrangements that are just as good as now. You lose both these safeguards if you break your continuous employment. For example, if you leave the railway industry to work outside, or you leave one railway employer to work for another. But all is not lost. Losing the safeguards only means you lose the right to insist that you belong to the JIS. If you're still in the industry, you can still belong to the scheme if your employer agrees, and it certainly doesn't mean that you've lost any money. Nothing can touch the funds you've built up from past service. If you do lose the safeguards and have to join another scheme, you don't have to transfer your money unless you want to. We invited to our studio a group of people who will be transferred to Railtrack on April the 1st.
I started in the railway 10 years ago as a signalman, Class 8 Belmont signal box, and I progressed from there through the signalling grades up to traffic supervisor at Ayr, and I've since come up to Paisley as a senior operations supervisor, and I hope to progress from there into management.
Yes, Tom. Hi, Tom. How are you doing in Anderson?
So it's same to the way around signalman.
One of the main things about this industry, it's got a good pension fund. There is a lot of people who put a lot of money into the pension fund, and they are worried that after all this has happened, they'll end up with nothing.
That's not right, and the safeguards that we've been all working for in the last year or so are designed to make sure that our pension scheme is secure and that the thing that you're most worried about doesn't happen, because it's my pension in there as well. The situation is that the scheme will effectively be translated from the present scheme into the new joint industry scheme. The investments that are there in the current scheme will simply continue to be there, and all new investments in the future will continue to be made in exactly the same way that they are made today. So the scheme itself is absolutely secure.
And see, you're talking, Paul, about the money being locked in. See, the likes I'm in brass 2, I pay into brass 2. Now, is that money safe that we've paid into brass 2?
Yes, it is.
And will that carry on into Railtrack?
The money's absolutely safe because it's part of your pension, part of your pension arrangements. And what you've got there and the arrangement that you have to pay money into brass will continue with you into Railtrack.
Right.
There's a question about whether you can change the amount you pay into brass in the
that was
future.
the next part of my question, yeah.
Well, I don't know. That'll be up to Railtrack to make a decision about that. Certainly, what you've got and what the amount you're paying currently, you'll continue to be able to pay when you move into the into Railtrack.
That's safe. That will just carry on as per usual.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, the BR pension scheme is supposed to be one of the best run schemes in the country. Are standards going to be maintained after April the 1st?
Yes, they will. There'll be no change in the way the schemes run, really, after April. It'll still be run through what's called a central trustee, and the trustees themselves are representatives of the employers and of the members of the scheme. That's all of us. And they are there today, and they'll continue through the changes, and it'll be running just the same way.
At present, when I retire, I'm entitled to a lump sum plus my pension. Will this be affected in any way under the new system?
No, I mean the arrangement that you've got will continue. The rules of the scheme are what dictate how it happens, and they are set by the trustees and can't be altered without agreement by the trustees. And I would expect that the arrangement that you're entitled to today will continue absolutely unchanged into the future, a lump sum and a pension.
If I wanted to move from a train operating unit into rail track after April the 1st, how will that affect my pension?
Well, now we're into a different situation, because after April, when the companies are split away, if you choose to change company, then it's like starting with a new employer. It'll be a fresh start. And therefore the protections that you've currently got to stay in the joint industry scheme and the statutory right to that are removed. But of course, when you join Railtrack, if you join them, you'll be looking at the package they've got to offer you. They may well decide to put you into their section of the joint industry scheme. I believe that that's what they intend to do for the moment anyway. And in which case you'll simply move your what's called the transfer value from the BR section into the Railtrack section. If you go like Bobby before April the 1st, if you're on Railtrack's books on April the 1st, then it's an absolutely seamless transfer and you don't need to do anything.
So, because the joint industry scheme will be managed by the same team that managed the BR pension scheme, very little will change. Your money will be just as secure, and you'll be able to carry on making brass contributions, and your new employer will have to match them. However, to be able to insist that you stay in the JIS, you must remain in continuous employment in the railway industry. Staff who are in passenger train units from April onwards will eventually be working for franchise companies.
If anything to do with passengers, we'll get involved with. Well, it's all part of the intercity welcome, the idea that we're trying to be more welcoming to passengers. You get a rush of people as soon as the train comes in. I actually enjoy it. Get to talk to people all day and get paid for it. People are obviously worried about the pension. Whoever it is that takes over the franchise, what's to stop them from bringing in their own pension arrangements? And what's to stop them forcing us to alter our present arrangement?
The employer, even if he's a large group who has lots of other pension schemes, will not be able to take that right away from the railway employees he acquires without their consent.
Is that going to continue not only into the next owner, but subsequent owners beyond that in years to come?
Right or the two rights will continue no matter how many owners there are of the business.
My husband did work for British Coal, and they've tried to do things with the pension fund, which using the money from the fund to pay redundancies. Finally, that wasn't allowed through court intervention. But how can we have assurances that they're not going to try and do the same thing with our pension fund?
Well, I think if they do, I'm quite sure that the trustees of the joint industry scheme will be just as vigorous in defence of their scheme as the British Coal trustees were in defence of their scheme. So I don't think you need to have any doubts on that score at all.
If I transferred under a franchise, East Coast Mainline franchise, and I transferred to a supervisor job at Euston under the West Coast, I would be considered to have made a voluntary move, and my pension would be frozen at the point of termination, and I would start again. Is this correct?
Well, the promise you have is as long as you stay in the same employer, you will have your pension rights will be preserved. You will have the right to a no less favourable pension, and you're promised now, and you have the right to stay in the joint industry scheme. But in the future, once the West Coast Main Line and the East Coast Main Line have been franchised away, there will be separate employers. There will be separately with employers, but nothing to do with one another, and you will not automatically be able to transfer from one to the other. The only way you will be able to go will be to leave one employer and join the other. Now, they will both be participants in this joint industry scheme, and the West Coast Main Line could, if they wished, and I hope they will, put you in this scheme.
There's a lot of drivers at my depot making a choice and going into Network South East, West Anglia and Great Northern, and at the moment with the possibility of not even progressing, as I have done through my 38 years, to be a mainline driver. If you go back into intercity at King's Cross. You haven't moved depots at all, really. You've moved franchises. That would interrupt their present pension rights.
I'm afraid the position is in the future will be much the same as if you people are changing employers, or they change from one bus company to another. There will be 25 independent passenger franchises, and yes, I agree. If you leave a job with one passenger franchisee and go to another, you will have to check up your pension arrangements before moving.
I intend to stay with Gatwick Express, and our service will probably be the first to be franchised. And as you've explained previously, we will take the right with us to remain in the joint industry scheme when that franchise is sold. What happens when the franchise changes hands again?
Well, if it changes hands again, you will still retain those rights. You can, no matter how many times the franchise changes, you will retain those rights.
Right, and what happens if that franchise holder goes out of business?
The franchise director effectively has the obligation to take steps to make sure that the service concern continues. He's likely to have to take on the existing staff to do that. And if that happens, they will maintain continuous employment, and they will still maintain their rights.
If you remain working for the same passenger franchise after privatisation, even if you get promoted or change jobs, you have an absolute right to remain in the JIS. You keep that right whenever the franchise changes hands. You lose the right to insist that you remain in the JIS if you move from one passenger franchise business to another, but your new employer may agree that you can stay in the scheme. Major areas of the industry will be formed into separate businesses and eventually sold outright.
I joined British Rail in 1975 and been with the railway now for almost 19 years. I've now reached the grade of supervisory in Red Star Parcels at Southampton. People that are actually working in the Red Star division of British Rail are quite concerned as to what the future actually holds for them, and they feel that there is less likelihood of security within the Red Star than perhaps the train operating unit of the railway. And I myself have personal concerns as to what the future holds for myself. If Red Star was sold to, say, TNT, what guarantees do I have that they would stay within the joint industry scheme for pension purposes, and who would make sure that they honoured that?
Well, the protection is with you, because we won't sell the company, first of all, until they can provide evidence that the pension scheme that they're proposing, what it is, what the rules are, and that it gives you the benefits which you're entitled to. If they move outside the railway industry, they've still got to provide you with a pension which is no less favourable than if you'd stayed with BR and in the industry. So that means that the scheme may not be exactly the same, but it's got to provide you with benefits that are no less favourable.
You will go into each firm which takes us, you know, to make sure that they're vulnerable and everything else is...
Well, there are a number of criteria which we use in judging whether somebody is a fit person to buy a company. And high on that list are questions concerning their employment conditions, what protections they're going to give, whether we believe that they're going to be a good employer, whether we believe that they're going to be a successful employer, because BR has got no interest in selling you into a situation where you're going to be made redundant the following day. Admittedly, that can always happen, and I can give no guarantees about that. But what we try and do is make sure that we sell you to a reputable employer.
What happens in the case of the company going bankrupt or into liquidation?
Well, that's a difficult situation, and the fact is that people lose everything in that situation. What you don't lose, of course, is the money that you've put into the scheme up till that point, because it's not part of the company's finances. It's locked away separately with trustees. So you don't lose what you've put in. What you will lose is your future service, and then you'll be like others who are looking for a job, and then when you join a new company, you've got to start again pensions-wise.
If I've made a decision to freeze my pension in the BR fund
and at a later date decide that I wanted to take it away to an alternative employment or do my own personal pension plan, can I actually do that? Yes, you can at any time. Of course, at that time you'd be well advised to get good advice about what you were doing, because the BR scheme is an excellent scheme and there are not many schemes around that would deliver that sort of benefit. So you need good advice, but the answer is yes, you can.
Paul, could you explain what the situation will be after the initial privatisation of the companies? What will be the situation when those companies are sold on for a second or possibly a third time?
The new employer must pick up all the obligations that the old employer had to you when they own the company. So there is actually no change. It's just a straightforward transfer of the shares of the company.
When you say must, is must enshrined in law?
It's part of the responsibility that the company have to you in law. Now, in terms of pension, can't be interfered with by the owners of the company, and therefore what you have in pension terms you hold.
So, as the huge organisation of BR begins to separate into smaller units and BR people are transferred to new employers, there will be some unique safeguards for pensions. The right to be in the joint industry scheme if your employer stays in the railway industry, and the right to a no less favourable pension if your employer does not. You keep the safeguards if a business is sold on. You can only lose the safeguards if you leave the business or the business stops trading. Whenever you and your job are transferred from one company to another, the pay and the conditions that you enjoyed immediately beforehand stay with you. This is because of something called TUPE, Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Regulations. In a nutshell, TUPE does two things. First, it guarantees that if your job is transferred to a new employer, you move with your job. You don't have to reapply. You're transferred automatically. The second thing is that you take with you the terms and conditions of employment that you already have. A new employer might want to negotiate a new employment contract with you, but the contract can't be changed except with your agreement. It's your right to insist on proper negotiation of any change. Then, of course, there are some general employment rights under the law. For example, rights to maternity leave or sick pay.
So what's to stop our new employer from changing our terms and conditions the day he takes over?
Well, of course, any employer can always propose new terms and conditions to their employees. BR can now. But I think it's unlikely that a lot of the new employers in the railway industry will do that on day one, as you suggest. Think about what an organisation is buying. An organisation is buying the skills and the experience of the staff, often very specialist skills. It's going to want to make it with those employees and to thrive with those employees. So it's hardly likely to go about dealing with new employees in a very aggressive way that undermines their confidence and undermines their commitment to the organisation.
Will the RFD Freightliner staff retain PT&R arrangements when we are being privatised?
Well, once the organisation's been sold into the private sector, the PT&R will continue to operate, but within the organisation that's sold into the private sector. It won't enable you to move from that organisation back to BR. So you transfers over with you under TUPE. As long as you don't agree a new contract of employment, you keep the PT&R, but it only gives you access to that part of the organisation that's been sold.
Will RMT members be able to remain in the RMT?
Nobody can take away your personal right to belong to the RMT, so that's secure. Indeed, if you transfer under TUPE to a new employer, and within BR, of course, RMT are recognised, then your right to trade union recognition will also transfer. There's nothing to stop the new employer subsequently raising questions of recognition, perhaps even wanting to change recognition, but nothing can take away your personal right to belong to the RMT.
Under TUPE, you also keep your entitlement to travel facilities when you're transferred to a new employer.
Well, concessionary travel forms part of the terms and conditions of employment of BR staff. It's part of our contract of employment. And so under TUPE, our entitlement to travel concession will transfer with our contracts of employment to our new employers. The way it will be made to work is like this. The franchising director, when he reaches an agreement with a new train operator, will require the passenger operator to continue to honour the familiar travel facilities that we all carry, including travel facilities held by pensioners. And so that's how we intend the right to continue to have travel facilities will be delivered in the new industry.
What about the position I will be in after privatisation? I'll be working for one of the freight companies. And there's a fear amongst those working in the freight sector that concessionary travel will not be an option.
Well, if you're in a freight company, then your new employer will have to pay the passenger industry for the continuation of your travel. Now, our experience of past privatisations is that these kinds of employers have continued to pay for their staff's travel year by year, and we expect that to continue in the future. The point is that your right to travel will go with you to your new employment, and your new employer will only be able to change that with your consent.
Certain businesses are going to offer money for free passage, basically. You know, they'll come up to you and they'll say, we'll give you X number of pounds for you to stop using free passes. That's fair enough. But what happens from a pensioner's point of view?
Well, let's first of all talk about the BR staff whose new employers are going to have to pay for their travel. Of course, new employers are quite free to seek to renegotiate terms and conditions with people. But the important point is that those terms and conditions could only be changed with the agreement of the staff. As for pensioners, those who have retired prior to privatisation, their travel facilities will be entirely safeguarded, irrespective of where their former department or BR organisation goes under privatisation. So if they used to work for, say, freight, and the freight employees are going to an employer who will have to pay for the employees' travel facilities, that won't affect in any way the right of former freight pensioners to continue to enjoy travel concessions.
Gareth, surely privatisation, will that mean a cut in pay and conditions?
No, you keep with you your existing pay and conditions. They go across with you under TUPE. You might subsequently agree to terms and conditions, but it doesn't always mean a cut. I know there are some horror stories about things that have happened on privatisations. But equally so, people have had improved terms and conditions after being privatised.
What's to stop an employer taking on new staff from outside, training them up to a set standard? Once they've got them to that set standard, then reviewing the conditions and the pay.
Could arise. It's going to take years, isn't it? I mean, it takes a long time to train a railway operator, and even if you do hire somebody off the street now and train them up in operating skills, it will take 10, 20 years perhaps to achieve the level of knowledge and skill of the railway to undertake the senior supervisory and management positions.
Is there any written guarantee, laid down guarantee, to say that pay and conditions will not be cut after privatisation?
Well, nothing is guaranteed for life. Under TUPE, you keep with you your existing terms and conditions when there's a relevant transfer. So, and thereafter, just as now, the employer might come to you and want to renegotiate your contract, but nothing's for life, and it would be wrong to give you an assurance that clearly would be outside what can reasonably be said.
There can be no 100% guarantees about the future under privatisation, but the law does now give you some important rights and pension safeguards. You can find out more from the booklet that comes with this video. One thing is certain, the privatised industry will need all the talents and skills that BR uses now.